G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. Here's a dangerous idea for you. The seemingly innocuous selection of a seemingly innocuous gentleman from the Midwest of the United States, Governor Tim Walz, or some people say Walz, or some people say Waltz. I like to say Waltz, with a harsh Teutonic Waltz. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. This seemingly innocuous selection could actually have profound implications, massive ripple effects for the future of the left in the United States and maybe even the future of the left across the whole Western world. I'm chipper, as you can probably hear. I think this is a great pick. Let me give you 3 reasons why. Firstly, the main takeaway from this pick that Kamala Harris has made of her vice presidential candidate is that there is no obvious advantage to picking this guy. And that is why the pick is paradoxically brilliant. It's not nearly as strategic as it could have been, and therein lies the kernel of genius in what I regard as being 3 ways. The first thing I want to discuss is the impact of this and what it means for the left in America. Then I want to talk about what this means for Trump and the narrative about Trump. And then I want to talk about what this tells us about Kamala Harris as a candidate and potentially as a president. Firstly, on the left. In one respect, the selection of Governor Walz is something of a capitulation to the left. He's pretty left-wing. Like, he's, of all of the people who Kamala Harris was looking at selecting, he's certainly not the kind of, center-right-ish, kind of stodgy, like pro-Israel, governor of Pennsylvania, which Shapiro, who she could have selected. This is someone who has enshrined the right to abortion into his state's law. He has legalized marijuana. He has expanded background checks to make it harder to buy a gun. The National Rifle Association gives him an F. They give scorecards. Isn't that sweet? They give scorecards to politicians on how pro-gun they are. They used to give him an A because he is a gun owner, and he lives in a farming community where it's totally normal in the United States to own a gun. But after several of the successive shootings, which one? Take your pick. After Sandy Hook and then the Las Vegas shooting, he ended up favoring some minimal restrictions on gun ownership, which sound radical to the National Rifle Association and probably to many people who are his constituents in the great state of Minnesota. Nonetheless, there's that puts him firmly on the left. He has provided universal free meals for school children in his state. He's given felons the right to vote once they leave prison. So convicts will be able to vote. That's a pretty left-wing idea in the United States, although not in most other countries. He has allowed undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants, let's just be blunt, to get driver's licenses. This is something that most people in left-wing states support, but can sound very sort of California to people in red states who are more hostile towards illegal immigrants. He has required companies to offer paid family and medical leave to their employees. He's committed his state to transition to carbon-free electricity by 2040. He's put $1 billion into affordable housing. You get the drift, right? Like, he is a person who actually achieves real-world, real-life, left-wing policies that would terrify, right-wing think tank Paul Ryan and possibly even Mitt Romney types. However, that is actually an asset in the sense that he doesn't couple any of those policies with social justice wokiness. He doesn't smell of California, San Francisco liberalism. He smells of the heartland, and this is exactly what the left needs. I had sort of jokingly said that actually if the Democrats seriously want to win the next election, and I joked about this in some seriousness with David Frum on the episode that we did right after Donald Trump's assassination attempt, which you should go back and listen to. It's really interesting hearing us we were recording it just before the assassination attempt, just before the Republican convention, and it feels like a lifetime lifetime ago. I mean, the way that we were talking about the inevitability of Joe Biden as the presidential candidate, about the upsides and downsides of, of Donald Trump as a candidate, feel like, they might as well be from a decade ago. Nonetheless, that's really interesting to listen to. We were sort of saying at the time, almost half jokingly, that what the Democrats would do if they really, 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 really regarded Donald Trump as the existential threat to democracy that they say that he is they would nominate Mitt Romney to run instead of Joe Biden. They would nominate someone who is so inoffensive to everybody on the right that the only reason why you would favor Donald Trump over him is because you're a deranged weirdo with culture war hang-ups. And then you would get the center-right, you would get the center-left, and a few people on the far left would probably stay home, but they would be more than outweighed by the center of gravity, yada, yada, appeal to the middle, blah, blah, blah. And when it became clear that Kamala Harris had the nomination stitched up because President Biden basically handed it to her and her potential rivals failed to step up and challenge her, then I thought, well, okay, she should nominate someone like a Mitt Romney. She should follow that logic. She should select as her running candidate, as her running mate, somebody who is incredibly inoffensive and fairly right-wing to pander to conservatives and reassure, especially the business community, that she's not a wild-eyed lefty. I thought she could nominate Mitt Romney for vice president. I mean, I don't know that he'd take it. Or what about someone outside the box? I've heard the name thrown around, Mark Cuban, businessman, television personality, much liked and would reassure the business community that a Democratic White House would not be antithetical to their interests and would have people who understand business in there. And now I realize that's all a bit silly. Because actually what you need in a vice presidential candidate is not someone who's radically different from the presidential candidate in order to attempt to placate people who hate the presidential candidate. Rather, it's someone who reflects the values of the presidential candidate, but in a slightly different way. They refract the attributes and point towards the attributes and the assets of the presidential candidate, but in a same but different way. So Romney wouldn't quite be right. Cuban wouldn't quite be right. A conservative person wouldn't quite be right with Kamala Harris. You would end up trying to please everybody and pleasing nobody. It reminds me of the sort of rule that you always tell to young writers, young creatives, young performers, people who might be going to auditions and so on. Like, just if you're an apple, be the best apple that you can be. Don't try to go in and be an orange. And, if you're an apple and think that, the market is really good, hot on oranges at the moment, so I have to go and be the best orange. If you're an apple, you're never going to win by presenting yourself as an orange, because there's always an orange out there. And I'm not even making this allusion to orangeness on the basis of Donald Trump's skin color. I'm just saying, be the apple that you truly are. And Kamala Harris is Kamala Harris, and she's never going to persuade people who don't like Kamala Harris to vote for her by nominating Mark Cuban. What she has done is realize that instead of nominating a conservative, what she needs is somebody who's not woke. She needs somebody who is not just not woke and not even anti-woke, but trans-woke. Not in the sense of transgender, in the sense of superseding all ideals of wokeness, like someone who is beyond the culture wars. And that is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. He comes across as a guy from a small town who, and by the way, if you don't know about, you know what I'm going to do right now, before I even go any further, I want you to listen to where this guy first exploded into public attention, because, this guy a few weeks ago, most Democrats had never even heard of him. And he sparked this kind of meme, this, I suppose, cultural idea that has ricocheted all over the interwebs and social media and pinged off pretty much every talking head on the left-wing side of politics in America over the past 2 weeks. This idea that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, his running mate, are weird. They're just weird. And I'll get to this in just a moment, and I'll close the loop on the point about his sort of being supra woke, beyond woke, not even on the battleground of wokeness versus anti-wokeness. But have a listen to where this all began. It was the 23rd of July. He was not on anyone's radar as being a potential running mate, but he went on Morning Joe, which is the morning show on MSNBC, and he said this.
People like J.D. Vance know nothing about small-town America. My town had 400 people in it, 24 kids in my graduating class, 12 were cousins, and he gets it all wrong. It's not about hate. It's not about collapsing in. The golden rule there is mind your own damn business. Their policies are what destroyed rural America. They've divided us. They're in our exam rooms. They're telling us what books to read. And I think what Kamala Harris knows is bringing people together around the shared values, strong public schools, strong labor unions that create the middle class, health care that's affordable and accessible. Those are the things. You look what they're talking about. They went right to division. They did not give us a plan on health care. Donald Trump talked about infrastructure. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris built bridges, built roads. So I think this is going back to the bread and butter, getting away from this division. We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's what they go at. That's not what people are interested in.
So that's what started this whole hubbub. That's what got the ball rolling. Then everyone started picking up the word weird to describe Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And all of a sudden, this governor from Minnesota was kind of shot to national superstardom and became a real candidate, a potential running mate for vice president. And what strikes me about that, why I say it's kind of beyond wokeness, is just listen to the way that he talks. He talks like a real heartland American. And that's why I think this is potentially so revolutionary for the left, because for the past 5 or 10 years, it's been clear that left-wing politics has become obsessed with the narcissism of small differences, where tribes of identity politics representatives like to complain at each other about how they're the more aggrieved ones and how we have to make everyone realize that there's a new sheriff in town and we all have to watch what we say and make sure that we, use the right transgender pronouns, or that we don't say the N-word even in conversation when we're talking about how terrible a word it is, or that we don't tell any jokes that could be regarded as being sexist, or that there's this whole tripwire-ification, this cancel culture-ification that I feel like we've reached peak levels of, but it hasn't yet, well, certainly not in academia we haven't. I think it's still very entrenched in academia and the media and entertainment. But in corporate America, I think we've reached peak woke. But it hasn't yet leached out of the body politic in the way that political actors think about things and talk about things. And this nomination of a guy who never seems to have been on board that train and who is talking about the values of progressivism and leftism that I believe in, that I suppose old school leftists would have believed in: egalitarianism, equality, universalism, giving people opportunity, giving people a leg up, treating people equally on the basis of their need rather than on the basis of their identity characteristics, treating all people on the basis of their characteristics rather than the color of their skin or, what genitals they've got between their legs. Like those kinds of ideals that you would have heard leftists talking about, before the woke culture wars, is what this nominee embodies. And let me read one other thing, because it's such a great point that he makes about Donald Trump in terms of being weird. He says, and this is in an interview with the New York Times, he says, I come from a town of 400, 24 kids in a class, 12 cousins, farming, those types of things. And I know they're not weird. I know they're not Donald Trump. The thing is, we have to get them away, he says, from what he's trying to sell, because that's just not who they are. He says, just picture in your mind Donald Trump coming home after a day of work and picking up a Frisbee and throwing it, and his dog catches it, and the dog runs over, and Donald Trump gives him a good belly rub because he's a good boy. Isn't that like a perfect articulation of the difference between Donald Trump and a non-weird person, a person who the governor of Minnesota is trying to reclaim the Democratic Party for, is trying to reclaim leftism for? As an op-ed columnist in the New York Times put it, Mr. Walz's liberalism is not California inflected. He is of a vanishing political breed, this columnist writes, the heartland left populist. And here is where I hope there's a glimmer of real change, which is not only is he a heartland left populist, which I think is the winning strategy, because the majority of people just are heartland left populists. At least enough of them are that when you combine them with the latte-sipping, Chardonnay-swilling cosmopolitan elites in the big cities, you have a majority. But it's also a way of kind of undermining the smugness, the contempt that the left has been saddled with ever since the Great Awakening began. You know, the sort of attitude that was embodied in Hillary Clinton's line about deplorables, which she was unfairly maligned for, because it's not what she really meant. She was talking about there being a specific class of Trump supporters who are deplorables, and then she went on to say, but most of them aren't. But the very idea that you could write anyone off as a deplorable has become something of an albatross around the neck of people on the left. This kind of I know better than you, finger wagging, high-minded, school marmish attitude towards those stupid people who are too dumb or racist to know any better than to vote for Donald Trump. And what Tim Walz brings to the table is a kind of ability to float above all that, an ability to float above the culture wars and speak plainly and truthfully to heartland Americans in a way that does seem like he would come home and throw the frisbee for his dog in a way that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump never would. So the guy comes from a small town in Nebraska. He did a series of odd jobs after high school. He built grain silos. He processed mortgage loans. He enlisted in the National Guard in the Army at the age of 17. He served in the Army for 24 years, never saw combat, but hey. He is most definitively not weird, which brings me to the second reason I think this is an inspired pick. What the term weird is doing to Donald Trump, both to his candidacy and to him as a human being. It's getting him riled up. He really doesn't like it. He's talked about it a few times in the past week. He's talked about, he said, I've been called a lot of things in my life. I can assure you, I've never been called weird. I'm definitely not weird. He's weird. He's weird, in ways that were sort of reminiscent of when his brain broke during one of the debates with Hillary Clinton. And, he started talking about, I'm not a puppet. I'm not a Russian puppet. You're a puppet. You're the puppet. When you get Trump into that mindset where you really get under his skin, you can call him a dictator. He doesn't give a shit. You can call him an authoritarian. He doesn't give a shit. You can call him toxic, sexist. He doesn't give a shit. But make him feel like he doesn't belong in the cool kids club, and you scratch a nerve. Make him seem like a misfit, like someone who was just sort of born broken. And I think you're getting somewhere with Donald Trump. It's his Achilles heel, this sense that no matter how hard he worked, obviously at the superficial, glib things that he works hard at, like, calling up publicists and pretending to be calling up journalists rather, and pretending to be Donald Trump's publicist so that he could get in the gossip pages of Murdoch tabloids and things like that. But no matter how hard he works at that, he never gets the kudos of the high end of town. He never really gets invited to the important parties. He never gets regarded with the respect that he deserves. That is a kind of algorithm that's running in the background of Donald Trump's brain. And if you can scratch it, if you can open it up, if you can needle it, then you bring out the worst in him. And so sort of almost like a trial lawyer in a court trying to make the witness snap. I think the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side has this ability to articulate and frame the worldview and the intrinsic beingness of Donald Trump and of J.D. Vance in a scathing way that cuts to their own insecurities and shows them up to be emperors with no clothes. I mean, so that on the one hand, it's great because it deranges them. And on the other hand, it's great because it reinvigorates the left with less fear and more power. Like, to call someone weird is very different from calling them an existential threat to democracy. it's quite clear that Governor Tim Walz does believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. He does believe that he will use the tools of his power and the organs of state to punish people who disobey him, to hollow out the public service and install his loyalists inside instead of people who will give fearless advice to the powerful. It's quite clear that the attacks that the Republicans will make on the judicial system in terms of installing favorable judges all over the place will run apace, and that Governor Walz is keenly aware of those threats. But he's also keenly aware about human psychology, and he's also keenly aware of how small town America feels and what they respond to, and what makes a popular politician, frankly, because he is extremely popular in his state. And what he knows is people aren't going to become their best selves if you're wagging your finger at them and telling them that they're idiots if they vote for a person who's going to destroy America. It's actually more powerful to dismiss Donald Trump as being just a bit of a self-obsessed weirdo than, some kind of posturing potential Hitler or Mussolini who's going to destroy the United States. I think there's something very psychologically astute about that denigration of the Trump and Vance movement. What I would just say is that it's deeply important that that people on the left who are not as sensitive as Governor Walz in the way that they articulate the point that they're trying to make, that they don't get carried away with this idea of weirdness in ways that make them sound as smug and condescending as Hillary Clinton did when she was talking about deplorables. We have to make sure that it's not the Trump supporters who are being regarded as weird. It's not the people who were left behind in Appalachia by economic changes that they had no responsibility for who are weird. It's not the people whose jobs were outsourced to China who are weird. It's not the long-haul truck drivers who, want a better job who are weird. It's not the conservative Christians who are weird. It's specifically Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and their suck-ups and hangers-on who are just weird. And you heard Governor Walz talk about it there. It's like, why is it so hard to just go to Thanksgiving and talk to your uncle because his brain has been contaminated by this weird stuff? Like this, it's just another way. It's what we would call being too online, essentially. It's the offline way of saying that you're too online, is to just say that you are weird. The last way in which I am super, super excited about this, after having talked about the implications for the left and the implications for Donald Trump, both in terms of Trump's internal psychology and in terms of the public's perception of him being an emperor with no clothes, is what this pick tells us about Kamala Harris as a candidate and as a potential president. The danger of Harris's being the candidate has always been that there's a perception that she is wishy-washy. She doesn't really know exactly who she is. She was this stern, harsh, anti-tough-on-crime prosecutor in California, and then all of a sudden when she was running during the George Floyd summer of riots, she was like, oh, I'm actually a softie, and I'm really, I'm cool with this stuff, and I want compassion for criminals, and go, like, defund the police. That has been tricky for her. Navigating the woke waters has certainly made her seem, in my eyes, like someone who's disingenuous and doesn't have a backbone. But the fact that she's picked this person against the advice of most political pundits who say, listen, you need Pennsylvania. There's almost no way to get to 270 electoral college votes without Pennsylvania. Just nominate the governor of Pennsylvania and be done with it. He's good in every other respect, and he's very popular. The fact that, look, you could argue on sort of grounds of political calculus that that's just not true. Paul Ryan didn't win Wisconsin when he was a vice presidential candidate. But I think there's something deeper going on, which is that we're getting a glimpse of a person. I hope we're getting a glimpse of a person who trusts her gut and is willing to go out on a limb and be defiant and run counter to the impression of her being easily manipulable. And that gives me hope, not just for her ability to win the election, but her ability to govern and be a decent president. It reassures me that she'll be less captive than I feared she would be to social justice activist mobs, and that she'll be less of a weather vane just flipping and flopping depending on what her advisors tell her, and that maybe that was just an unfair characterization of a political novice at a time that was very disorienting to everybody. And if I'm willing to reevaluate my previously harsh judgments of Kamala Harris, and look, this may be motivated reasoning because I just want to believe in her because I don't want another Trump term, but I don't think it is. I think if I'm willing to be honest with myself and give her the benefit of the doubt, I didn't know very much about her. None of us really did. We saw what she was able to cut through in the media cycle when she tried to run against Joe Biden the first time and failed. But now she has made one big decision that makes it clear that she's willing to go against political advice, look someone in the eye, make a judgment call about them, trust her gut, and once she's done trusting her gut, end up siding with the person who I think best embodies the anti-woke, supra-woke, beyond the culture war mandate of what the left actually needs to be if it's going to win elections in the future. So I'm feeling pretty chipper today. I hope that's been useful, just hearing what my thoughts are. I can't wait. I've previously been dreading the pre-election period. Now I'm super excited about it. I hope you're excited too. We'll get back to regular programming next week. Take care. Lots of love. See you soon.